let's start off with what we are going to be going through today. So first, I'll be giving a brief introduction about who I am and the course I studied in JC, and then that will be followed by the main economic syllabus that you all will study if you choose to offer these subjects, and followed by some of the question types that you might encounter. So we normally have case study and essay questions, which if you are not familiar with, I'll be going through later on as well. And then after that will be the scheme of assessment. So that will be for the exam itself, what are the topics that will be tested and how will they be tested. Yeah, and finally some sharings about what is enjoyable about econs and what is something that is not so enjoyable, and finally the Q&A. Okay, so let's start off with a brief introduction of myself. Yeah. Okay, so I was actually from RI and RJC, so I was from the RP program, the no, sorry, the IP program, and then in JC I offered BCME. Yeah, and I am currently serving my NS lah, and then I'll be entering university in 2023 studying law at NUS. So I do understand that this is an economics lecture. However, if you all have questions regarding other things as well, feel free to also ask in the Q&A in the Mentimeter link that we will share later on. Yeah, so just a quick introduction about myself. Okay, so we shall start with H2 econs first. So for H2 econs, there are actually several main themes. So just to give a brief introduction of what economics is, because most people might not be familiar. So economics is essentially the study of the world around us. It can range from very practical things like pricing to other things like demand and supply. So I think we all know in our daily lives, we come across these concepts, just that sometimes we don't really know how to articulate them. So econs is basically the area where they teach us how to articulate all these concepts. Yeah, so our first main topic in econs will actually be scarcity. Okay, so just to give a brief overview of scarcity is when there are limited resources but unlimited demands, which is why we need to have pricing. So like we have differentiated pricing where the more expensive goods are bought by people who can afford them, and then people who can't afford them are what we call filtered out of the market. So these are several concepts that will also be introduced to you in the course of your study. Yeah, and the next one is price mechanism. So price mechanism is mainly concerned with demand and supply. So you learn things like when demand increases, then how will that affect the price? Or when supply changes, how will that affect the price? And so on. Okay, and then for firms and decisions, it's about the different types of firms that we encounter in our daily life. So there are things like monopoly, which I think we have all heard of. Then there are things like uh, mono, monopolistic competitive firms. So these are small firms that all compete for a very small share of the market. So it's just about different types of companies and firms that we see in our daily lives. And then after that will be market failure. So market failure is when the market fails to allocate goods in a way that is efficient. So sometimes when there's a monopoly, then they might artificially increase prices, and that is not good for the market as a whole. So that is what happens when the market fails. Okay, so just a caveat for this is that firms and decisions are not actually in the H1 syllabus. So H2 syllabus will cover all four. H1 syllabus will just cover number 1, 2, and 4. So that is for the microecons topic. So microecons is normally taught in the first year of JC, and then macroecons in the second year of JC. Right? So for macroecons, there are actually three main sections. First one is intro to macroecons. So this one is just a brief overview of the concepts. Like we learn things like what we call aggregate demand, aggregate supply. So there's the word aggregate in front because it's talking about the whole economy as a whole. Versus for microecons, it's just called demand and supply. So we'll learn a lot of these terminologies as well in our introduction. Yeah, and following on to macroecons aims and policies. Over here, we'll learn about the different policies that are present in economies. Like there is fiscal policy, there is monetary policy, there's exchange rate policy, and so on. Yeah, so I think that macroecons especially is useful because when you read articles, especially financial articles, like when you see articles about inflation or deflation, these actually are what we learn in econs in H2 and H1 econ syllabus. So this is where econs can come in useful in our daily lives as well. Okay, and finally, the last part is about the national economy. So this was actually a CLT, common last topic for my batch. I was in a batch of 2020, yes, but I think it's still in the syllabus for the current batches lah. Although it's not in the syllabus for H1. So these are the three main sections in macroecons that will be covered. Okay, so that's all for syllabus. I think just to give you all a very quick overview lah, nothing too much in detail. Okay, so moving on to another section that you all might be interested in is what are you going to be tested on in econs? So in econs, we have two types of question types, primarily case study and essay questions. Okay, so case study are questions that are based on the passage, and there will actually be different marks for the different questions as well. I think quite similar to in secondary school where you study history, there is a passage and then you answer questions based on the passage. So something quite similar to that. Yeah, and then there are short questions, medium and long questions, and we'll actually go through this in more detail maybe during the the sample lesson as well lah. So here I'm just introducing the main framework. Okay, so this is the first type. The second type is the essay questions. So essay questions are typically 25 marks each, and they could either come in the form of one long question, means the whole question is 25 marks, or it could be two short questions that add up to 25 marks. Yeah, but whichever the case, essays are primarily require you to use your own knowledge. So there is a short preamble to sort of guide you along, but you still need to rely on your own knowledge to solve the question lah. Okay, so that is the two types, case study and essay questions. Okay, and moving on to the actual crux of the sharing. So this is the scheme of assessment for H2 and H1 econs. H1 econs will be on the next page. Okay, so for H2 econs, as I mentioned earlier, there are two sections, case study and essays. For case study questions is two compulsory case studies of 30 marks each and total of 2 hours 15 minutes. So this will give you a rough gauge of how intensive the exam is. Okay, so to be honest with you, right, econs is going to be one of the more intensive exams that you'll sit for. Maybe if you compare to your sciences like chem or bio or math, yeah, econs is going to be very intensive. Maybe second to maybe okay, maybe GP can rival a bit lah in terms of the writing part because you really have to write a lot and write very fast as well. So that's for the case study component. For the essay component, there are actually 3 compulsory essay questions that you have to do. So you'll be given 6 questions and you need to choose 3 out of the 6. Yeah, and it's also 2 hours 15 minutes and 45 minutes per essay question. Okay, so just to give everyone a brief overview of the scheme of assessment for econs. Okay, this is for H2. For H1, it is quite different because there is no essay component. So you'll only be tested singularly on case studies, but the case studies will therefore be slightly longer. So for the H2 case studies, it was actually only a 2 hours 15 minutes paper, but this will be a 3-hour paper and also will have more marks. Okay, so this is for the H1 assessments. Okay, and moving on. Okay, so now this is where I share about some of my reflections after studying econs. So, admittedly, econs, right, is one of the new, I'll say the new options available in JC. Most secondary schools do not offer econs in secondary school. So a lot of people might be wondering what is this even like. I don't even know what econs is. So that is very true. At the start, there will be quite a steep learning curve, especially because econs involves a lot of diagrams, and these diagrams are very niche. It's not like you are drawing like a table or something. There are specific pointers and axes that you need to know, and then you also need to apply, and there are a lot of different diagrams. So this at first can be quite intimidating and daunting lah. But granted that eventually after a while you'll sort of get the hang of it, and then from there on it's more about the application of concepts. Yeah, so I think this can be one of the initial difficulties, but definitely won't be a long-term concern for any of you. Okay, so these are some of the difficulties that students might encounter. And on the flip side, what is good about econs or what is enjoyable about econs? So as I started off the sharing by saying, econs is really about the world around you. Because at least from my perspective, after studying econs, let's say when I read the newspapers and I read an article about inflation in this country, or that this country is changing its exchange rates in response to a certain crisis, then you sort of have a better understanding of what is happening and some of the technical jargon that they use as well. So it's just about understanding the issues around us lah, and we sort of are given a new perspective of how to view these issues. Okay, and practically speaking, econs is also very common sense based. So granted that there are technical jargon, but those technical jargon is just to articulate the concept. The concept by itself is very common sense. Because like, for instance, we give example of demand and supply. We say like when the demand increases, the price will increase, which is very common sense. Because if more people want to buy something, then the seller has greater has a greater ability to control its price since it's in such high demand. So you can see that actually a lot of these concepts are very common sense lah, which is what makes it slightly easier as well to study econs. I actually saw that from the sign up form, a few of you all asked questions about regarding econ, so I'll answer those questions first. After that, then we'll move to the Mentimeter and answer the questions that you all here may have. Okay, so some pretty interesting questions. I'll say number 4 is quite interesting, so I'll address that later on. Okay, so let's start with question 1 first. Is secondary school econs a requirement for JC econs or needed to do well in JC econs? My answer to you would be a straight no, because most people actually do not have any knowledge of econs whatsoever before taking it in JC. And a good example would be me lah, as a just an someone who falls under this category. Okay, so econs really, I think one of the so-called benefits, right, is that everyone sort of starts on the same path. Especially if you're an IP, I think it's unlikely that you have taken econs in secondary school. So compared to other subjects, like if you are going to take history, if you're going to take lit or geography, those things actually have already been taught in secondary school. So if you are maybe slightly weaker in those subjects, you might think that you have a slight disadvantage in JC, which might be true as well, because they do rely on some of the fundamentals. So the difference for econs is that it's completely new. Maybe 90% of people wouldn't have known what it's about, which means that everyone starts on the same starting path. So that's actually might be a plus lah for you. Okay, so definitely secondary school econs is not a requirement. Okay, so that kind of answers number 2 as well. But I'll say that what can help in econs is just to have a brief understanding of current affairs. So that when you are studying your econs concept, right, you'll find it easier to apply to the real world. When you see things happening around you, then you sort of understand where does my theoretical knowledge come in practically. And that's when you will have a greater appreciation of the subject as well. Okay, so that's for the first 2 questions. Okay, number 3, is it possible to score an A for econs without tuition for it? Again, I'm a living example. So I never had tuition in any subject, and yeah, I got an A for econs. So definitely it's possible. Okay, so I'll say for econs is a lot about practice. So econs is actually in a weird way similar to math. So there are concepts that they teach you, but you need to practice writing essays or doing essay outlines in order to apply the concepts and then make sure that you are answering in the correct way. Okay, so another challenge of econs is the question analysis, which is very pivotal, similar to GP. If you read the question wrongly, then sometimes you use the wrong framework to analyze, it might also cause some difficulties, which is where students should be more careful in lah. But I'll say that it's definitely possible to score an A. Yeah, just with practice and also so the content normally is assumed. Content is assumed knowledge. So what you need to do is apply the content to the specific question, and that is what will give you the A in econs. Alright. Okay. So finally, for the interesting question, okay, is competition in RI very intensive or very intense? Okay, I have to say yes to a certain extent. I think in all JCs is probably very intense because of A levels. A level is like the final milestone for a lot of people, right? And especially for IP kids, we all only had our PSLE, so like A levels is the next big milestone in our life lah. So yes, it is very intense, but I'll say that there is a great support system as well in the form of your friends, in the form of your teachers, and in the form of the materials and resources that you are given by the school. So my school, for one, had really good resources. I think our resources objectively are one of the best lah among the JCs in terms of the quality of the notes as well as the materials like the TYS or the practices that we are given. So definitely I is the competition itself is intense, but I think the support network as well is very strong, which I think will be similar in other JCs as well. So hopefully this will allay some of your concerns, like if you are intending to apply to RI or come to RI in JC. How do we score well for econs? Okay, so for econs, really scoring well is like I said, it's a lot about the application of concepts. So the school will certainly teach you the concepts, like what is price and what is the various types of firms. But important thing is when you see the question, you need to know which concept do I use. Okay, so this is one thing that is special about econs in the sense that sometimes we learn about macro and micro. Sometimes they will like to merge the two. So as in a question can have two parts. One part is micro, one part is macro. So this is where you need to have the flexibility as well as the knowledge. Because if you don't have form content, you might not even recognize that you need to use both macro and micro, that sort of thing. Okay, so it's really about having a firm knowledge of the content, and then on the basis of the content, you then apply to the specific question. And that is really what will score you well for econs. Yeah, and I think that a lot of people might have a concern that people generally do badly for econs, which is kind of true. Yeah, so for our in J1, actually most people were scoring maybe C's or D's for econs, which is natural because econs is after all a new topic. So it's like when you're learning a new language. At the start, you'll definitely be quite bad at it lah. But after a while, then you gradually improve. And by the time people hit prelims, the grades are normally quite okay already, like comparable to other subjects. Okay, so in terms of grades wise, I think not a concern. Definitely can be molded. Yeah, it comes really with the practice, and also sometimes it's just about the scope. So as you learn more and more, right, you learn how to interrelate the different topics as well, and that will improve your overall understanding of the subject. Yeah, so this is really what will help everyone to score well in econs. Okay, so I hope that answered the question. Yeah, okay. So let's go to the next one. Okay, is econs more language based or technical based? Okay, so to interpret this question, language based, will you be referring to in terms of the like use of language, like GP or like vocab or that sort of thing? If the person who sent this, if you are comfortable to unmute, you want to do that, then we can clarify what you meant by language based.
Yeah, language based is your vocabulary.
Okay, vocabulary. Okay, thanks so much for unmuting. Yeah, okay, so to address that question, econs is really very technical based. So nothing about vocab. It's not like you have to be good in English or anything. Yeah. In fact, the vocabulary per se is more the econs vocabulary. So it's like the technical jargon or keywords in that sense. Okay, so no worries, no need to use like flowery adjectives or anything. That's for GP. That's for the GP side lah. For econs itself, is very very technical based. Can so I think the main difficulty also people conflate or rather people confuse econs and GP because sometimes when you see a weird question, right, then you might be sort of stumped as to what economic concepts can I apply, and therefore because you can't think of any, then you start writing like a GP essay, like you are trying to elaborate and give evidence, which then it will become completely irrelevant already because econs is very based on the concepts. So that is how it actually distinguishes itself from GP. Yeah, hope that answers the question. So in conclusion, yeah, is language is definitely not a requirement. In fact, it's a detriment because it will shift the attention away from the technical part, which is what econs is all about. Okay, so that's for yeah this question. Okay, next one. Since econs is a new subject for almost all of us, are there any tips, things to take note of before or doing or while we learn econs? Okay, so yeah, econs is a new subject for all of us. So some of the tips will be just to embrace the new things that you are learning and not to start with a defeatist attitude, because I think especially for my class, right, some people were quite defeatist, especially in J1 when like the first class test and then everyone was like failing, which is really natural lah. So I'll say yeah, just to have the attitude that you'll eventually be able to learn stuff lor. And practically speaking also, just to be more aware of current affairs. So definitely you don't have to start like getting seniors notes and studying content before entering JC. Don't do that. Instead you should read papers. Like for instance, if you have a Straits Times, if you actually have the Straits Times newspaper, there is always a business or finance section. So that is a good place to start, because when you read those articles, you realize that you actually would not understand a lot of the terms. Like they use a lot of technical jargon that you don't understand what they are saying. So what is a good thing to do is just to read the paper and then to research on what are the language that they're using, and that can sort of serve as a kickstarter for yourself as well lah. So even though not everything might be in the H2 syllabus, but still it's just a good way to pick your interest in the subject, because if you're interested in the subject, naturally you'll be more motivated to study as well. Okay, so these are some small tips that I can give to everyone lah. Yeah, before starting econs. But as with any subject, it is okay to just go straight into the content. But then again, without any proper guidance, you might be quite lost. So maybe that won't be so helpful. Yeah, but after all, it's still up to you lah. So if you have very helpful seniors who have like annotated notes, then you can of course feel free to just try to study them so that you might have an edge when you start school. Okay. Next one. Okay, with econs, what kind of uni courses can I take, or what are some job prospects in the future? Okay, good question that I purposely left out of my sharing so that I can share during the Q&A lah. Okay, so what are some of the uni courses? So uni courses typically involve those with business or finance. I think maybe more the finance side. So for instance, if you're a financial consultant or you are going into the field of business, so anything related to econs is actually very wide. It's not specialty. Okay, they do offer econs in the university, but normally people will take it together with another domain. So like say you want to learn marketing, then marketing and economics. So it's really a very versatile thing that can expose you to many different career paths. Yeah, so I think since I'm saying that, right, it means that econs is a very versatile field. So that is definitely an advantage, maybe compared to taking history or geog. Those are very niche. So let's say you take history, I would think that history, okay, I might not be very accurate on this, but I would think that history might be more towards a very niche field, like becoming a history teacher or becoming a historian, because I think it's really quite specific. Okay, but on the other hand, econs is very wide. So let's say even if you want to do things like law, you might do also an econs background might be useful in some way. I'm not saying that it might definitely be useful, but in some way. Let's say if you're a lawyer in a huge firm that is having a lot of business and financial transactions, then sometimes in interpreting the law, right, you might need to have a basic fundamental understanding of econs. So yeah, in other words, econs is a very versatile field lah. And definitely, if you want to leave your options open and you're undecided between the humanities, I will definitely encourage you to take econs. Okay, so yeah, hope that answers the question. Okay, why do you decide to take econs, and how hard do you think econs compared to the chemistry or sciences? Okay, interesting questions. Okay, first one, why did I decide to take econs? Right, for me, I actually took history in secondary school. So, yeah, in lower sec, I took history and geog. Then I was on the IP lah, so I took history in upper sec. Okay, so why did I decide to take econs? I think it was more from the practical standpoint as well, because my older brother also, he's 3 years older than me. So he sort of went through the experience and then he was sharing that econs is a lot more versatile like I shared. And also my history wasn't particularly strong. So it's not like I was super good in it and I knew that I will be acing JC history lah. Okay, so that's why I sort of thought of econs as a way to broaden my options. Because like I was saying, econs is generally a broader field compared to history or geog. Yeah, so I'll say these are my main reasons lah. Okay, and the interesting question, how hard do you think econs is compared to chemistry or sciences? Okay, for me, I'll say it was between chemistry and bio. Okay, so in the sense that okay, chemistry and math are one of my like strongest slash favorite subjects. So let's not talk about that. So maybe we compare it with bio. So econs and bio, okay, bio definitely there's a lot of memory work and also there's a lot of writing and effort needed to prepare. Similar for econs. I'll say where they differ, right, is that econs is really about application. Sometimes bio, you similar question might come up, so you can sort of use the same concept and apply it very easily. But econs, there's a lot of novelty. There's a lot of new stuff. They can just show you like a case study, right, about a country that maybe you've never even heard of. So if you've never heard of the country, you certainly can't know anything about it, and that is where your econs knowledge needs to come in during the exam itself. So I'll say that is what is hard about econs, that you need to be able to apply concept very well. Yeah, but on the other hand, it also goes back to the common sense point. So it might appear that it's very hard to apply, but if you understand and grasp the basic concepts, then it doesn't matter what case study or what country they throw at you, you'll be able to address that country because you just use the fundamental concept and apply to whatever new thing that you are given. Okay, so I think in that sense, econs is actually comparable. Definitely, I'll say for myself harder than chemistry lah, but comparable to biology, yeah, or sciences, physics, yeah. I mean, most of you all might have set in for the physics, the physics sharing, so you can make your own conclusions from there lah. Okay, so this is for econs. Yeah, compared to history and geog. Okay, for that one, I would say quite difficult to say lah because I didn't offer history or job, but I would think that the requirement might be slightly lower as well from a logical standpoint. If anyone wants to, if any of the fellow tutors want to chip in here, it's fine. Yeah. So I think for me, from a logical standpoint, it will appear that it could be slightly less strict in the form of content because after all people already have a background in history and geog. So when they enter JC they learn a lot more in depth. But for econs everyone is on the same starting ground. So definitely, yeah, if you are worried that everyone that you might struggle, then just know that everyone else around you is struggling as well. So after all, A level is on a bell curve, and then yeah, so this definitely shouldn't be a concern lah. Like what if you are not good at econs because that is what everyone else will be thinking. So don't let that stop you from taking econs on. I'll say whether you want to take econs, right, focus on whether you have an interest in it and whether practically speaking you think it will be useful for you lah. If you say have a certain career you have in mind, whether it will be applicable to that career. Okay? Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next question. Why do you take law in the end? Okay, sorry, this isn't very related. Okay, Ken, no worries about that. Okay, so why did I take law in the end? So actually, as I introduced, I was in a very sciencey class, BCME, and actually, like one third of my class tried or went to medicine. So yeah, law is a very unconventional choice on my end. Okay, so just to give a bit of background, my brother also studied medicine lah. So I sort of knew what medicine was, and I knew that it wasn't for me because I started like disliking bio more and more like towards the end also. All the memory work, all that, it just wasn't for me lah. Okay, having said that, yeah, law also has a lot of memory work, but it's not in the sense of hardcore memorization. Like bio, a lot of times is you need to memorize certain mechanisms or like certain parts in medicine will be like memorize parts of the body, that sort of thing. So law on the other hand is very application based. Like you might study the law, but after all it's a lot about applying the concepts, which is why in a sense it's better to econs or it's a lot about the application part. Yeah, and for me, practically speaking, law is also a very versatile degree. So even if you graduate with a law degree and you don't decide to become a lawyer, it's completely fine. You can always go into other paths like business, finance, accountancy, because a law degree is very valuable lah. Compared to the other way around, that's not possible. You can't like maybe study accountancy and then suddenly want to practice as a lawyer. Okay, so hope that answers your question. If you have any further things, yeah, feel free to just send another question. Hopefully, we can cover it maybe towards the end. But just a short sharing on my end. Yeah. If you have any questions about the law admission process, right? I think because this is the econs sharing, so maybe let's not address it here, but you can also feel free to just ask in the Discord chat, and I'm sure we can help you out there. Okay, so is there H3 econs? Yes, there's H3 econs, which will be offered in J2. So similar to the other H3 subjects, it will be primarily based on the grades that you have in J1. And then the school will decide whether they will let you offer it. Okay, so what is the difference between H3 econs and H2 and H1? Okay, so for H3 econs, it is quite similar on content wise, meaning that the same topics are covered, just that they go a lot more in depth. So like say for instance, we talk about forms and decisions in H2. So H2 will learn a certain amount of info and then H3 will pile onto that info. So it's like you learn more in depth lah. Okay, in terms of assessment wise, I think if I'm not wrong, it's quite similar lah. So really econs, H3 econs is just a step further than H2. Yeah, so I think right now no need to be too concerned about H3 because after all it's still in J2. So I'll advise that you can see how you're doing in J1 with your H2 and then decide whether you want to offer in J2. Okay, hope that answers the question. Okay, is there calculation involved in econs or is it only social econs? Okay, good question. I would say that 95% is social. I think social econs you mean that it is just in terms of explaining and writing, which is true lah. 95% is in terms of that. But there is a little bit of calculation in econs. Sometimes when they ask you about this concept of price elasticity. Okay, so price elasticity refers to the concept of how okay, I think this might be a bit technical, but I'll try to explain briefly lah. It's about how price elastic something is. So let's say if the is how the price affect something like, so let's say if the, yeah, if you say that something is very price elastic, right, it means how is the thing like dependent on the price. Like let's say if the price increases, right, how will that affect the good in terms of its demand? That is price elasticity of demand. So for this concept is quite technical because firstly you need to draw a graph. So the graph will be curves of like different shapes, and then you also need to explain the steepness and all that. So this is where some calculation can come in lah, but very minimal. Not like the math like calculus or differentiation type lah. Just very simple arithmetic. Okay, so if you say like you are weak in math or anything, that shouldn't discourage you for econs because really is on the very elementary level. Yeah, so no worries about this. Okay. Okay, next one. How much time do you spend studying econs in a day? How do you study the subjects? Okay, first question. How much time do you spend studying econs? Okay, I'll say it depends. So, econs is mainly a practice subject. So, I didn't really spend a whole lot of time studying the content because after all, for econs, right, you can flip through the textbook from page 1 to the last page like 10 times and still you can fail the exam because you don't know how to apply the content. So, what I did was I spent maybe 30% studying the content, and then the next 70% I spend trying practice questions and then looking through the model answers. Okay, a lot of the times the model answer is where the magic lies because the model answer tells you what the teacher is looking out for, and you can realize all the keywords and all the techniques are mentioned over there. Okay, so I'll say that, yeah, studying econs definitely is not that intensive, not as intensive as say bio, where you really need to know your stuff lah. In a sense, econs is really about applying the concepts. And how do I study for the subject? Okay, so for econs, actually, I made my own personal notes, and also in a small group we made our notes that we shared among ourselves lah. So it's good to make your own notes because you can identify what are the important aspects that you need to focus on. Okay, because okay, another thing about econs that I think I should tell you all, right, is that the notes often come in very long paragraphs. So they will be explaining one concept and then they will give a whole lot of examples and a whole lot of elaboration and all that. But the thing is, this is not exactly necessary when you are trying the exam question because the exam question is going to be completely different from what is given your notes. Like the examples and all that will be completely different. So a lot of the times it's not about word memory word. Like it's not about just memorizing word for word. It's about understanding the main concept and sometimes just articulating it in your own way as well. As long as the certain keywords are present in your answer. So this is why to study the subject, right, is not advisable to just always go through your textbook from page 1 to the last page. Instead, you should make your own notes and identify what are the important keywords and what are the important sections or important content, like the basic content that you need to know. And then the rest is just you fill in yourself during the actual exam. Okay, so I'll say studying wise, yeah, it's not a big concern also lah. More about the application once again, in terms of how you apply your knowledge. Right, so that is for this question. Okay, in comparison with geography and history, would econs be easier or harder? Okay, so again, a very subjective question. Okay, for me, I think personally, right, I found econs to be quite comparable with history lah, with history that I took in Sec 3. Yeah, for geography, I can't really say this. Maybe during the, if there's a geography sharing, you can ask this question again lah, if the presenter can give more insight. Yeah, but for history wise, I'll say it's quite comparable. Yes, it's quite comparable in the sense that it is the basic concepts are quite easy to understand. Like you might be able to ace the whole textbook. So the only part that is harder per se would be in the assessment when you are actually writing the essay or you're answering the case study. Okay, but again, I think that can be trained. So not a big concern there. Yeah, so I think really econs, right, it's just about the effort you put in lah. It's normally like a proportional one, the effort and reward. Okay, not really proportional, but you will see some improve. You'll see some correlation at some point. Okay, because it's really about the practice. So let's say if you have gone through the whole 10-year series, right, and you are familiar with all the different types of questions, definitely the questions that come out in A levels for your year, right, will at least have some similarities. So that's why it is in a sense muggable lah. Yeah, but again to emphasize, econs really about the practice, not really about the memory work and the content. Yeah, so I'll say it's comparable to geography and history. Okay, maybe I'll go a bit faster. Okay, how's the process for applying for law like? Okay, very, very quickly. Okay, so application for law, NUS law and SMU law both have selection test and interview. So the selection test is a written test around 1 hour long, and then the interview is a conversational GP. Yeah, so when people ask me like how's the interview, like I like to tell them that it's just GP but you're talking lah, which I think makes a lot of sense. So what happens is the professors will ask you about certain current affairs, and then they will ask for your views on it. As simple as that. But you are not expected to know the laws. So you don't have to quote some law and then explain from that. You just explain based on your logical reasoning lah. Yeah. So okay, this is a very short sharing. If you want like to know more, feel free to also ask us in the Discord, because yeah, actually we should have a sharing for like uni and stuff like. If we have in the future, I'm sure we can address as well. Okay, sorry for going so quickly in the view of time lah. Can okay, what do you need to study law? Okay, what do you need? I'll say an interest. Okay, so a lot of people study law for the prestige, like after medicine, then is law lah, like very prestigious. I'll say like what is needed to sustain you is really the interest, because in law school, right, you'll be doing a lot of reading, a lot of writing. So really, if you are been doing your humanities and you hate like every time you do a history essay you hate writing so long lah, you rather just do a math question and just like write numbers, then definitely law might not be for you lah. So it's really about having the interest in the law and then being able to sustain you throughout your study. Okay. Okay, is it better to take H2 Econs or H1 Econs for science student, which has better versatility? Okay, so this one, I can give you a definite straight answer. If you are not sure, definitely just take H2 Econs. I think it's also been shared in either the other lectures, either the bio, the bio or the physics lectures. The presenter shared as well that H2 Econs is more versatile, because if you take a H2, you can choose to drop to a H1 anytime. Like if you offer, for me I offered 4 H2s and GP, right, so you can choose one of the 4 H2s to drop to a H1, and then this gives you some flexibility in your RP lah, or your points eventually. Yeah, so I think if it's not a question about ability, like you are capable of taking H2 econs, I think just definitely go for it. Yeah, and even if you might think that you are slightly weaker, I advise you to still go for H2, because if you go for H2, you can always choose to drop to a H1 anytime. But I don't think it works vice versa as well. So in other words, just leave the doors open lah. Because if you take a H1, right, then what if you don't do well your H1? Then that is really quite bad already lah. Because your H1 will definitely be counted. But if you don't do well your H2, you can still rely on your other H2s to pull up your overall grade. Okay, so okay, the uni part I think I answered pretty much just now. It's very versatile lah. Yeah, so definitely H2 will be more versatile than H1. Okay, again apologies for going so fast. If I didn't properly address any of your questions, please feel free to just ask in the Discord chat later on as well. Okay, how should we study effectively? Okay, so study effectively, yeah, I think I've touched on it multiple times. It's just about the application and about trying a lot of past year questions. So I think honestly, right now shouldn't be that much of a concern if you are wondering whether you should offer econs. But really, studying effectively is about getting the key points out from your notes, then knowing the key points by heart, and then learning how to apply in the exam question as well. Okay, so I'll say in a nutshell, yeah, that is how you study effectively. Okay, and okay, so same thing lah. Okay, how do you revise and study? Yeah, so really it's just about being sure of your content and then being able to apply. Okay, is there a large difference in content and workload? Okay, this is a good question. So I think, like I shared earlier, H1 econs in terms of content is slightly less. For instance, it doesn't have firms and decisions at all. And firms and decisions is quite a big part of micro econs in H2. So I think that is where an advantage lies, in that you study less and also you are tested on less. Because H1 econs only has case studies versus H2 has both case study and essay. So this is where the main difference is. Yeah, so I'll say that it is definitely easier to manage, but the caveat is that it is not necessarily easier. Okay, so I'll say this again. It is less stuff to study, but it is not necessarily easier. What this means, right, is that you could be studying less stuff, but still the difficulty is the same. So if you are choosing H1 econs because you doubt your ability, I'll say that you shouldn't do that lah. Because really H2 econs, like we addressed in the earlier question, is a lot more versatile, and also the difficulty is the same. So it's just about studying less, basically. Yeah. So hope that answers the question. Okay, study tips. Yeah. Okay. Any assessment books? I'll say no need assessment books. Just look at the 10-year series. Okay, so study tips we address already. Yeah, so 10-year series the most important. Assessment books sometimes do not know the exact A-level syllabus well, so they might also be a bit off. Especially, okay, one thing I need to say, right, is be very, very wary of the model answers in assessment books, because some of them are not A-level tutors. They don't know exactly what Cambridge is, or rather what the GCE markers are looking out for. So it's very, very important to always approach your school teachers instead. Even if you get a question from assessment book, you can try the questions there, but for the answers, right, go to your school teachers, because they will know exactly what the A-level marker will be looking out for. Okay, how big is the advantage in secondary school econs? Okay, I'll say not. I'm honestly not sure what really is covered in secondary school econs, but I'll say possibly not a very big advantage, because after everyone starts, most people will be new to econs, and I think therefore the teachers will also be covering all the basic and fundamentals. So maybe you have a slight advantage, but I'll say, yeah, nothing too much. But obviously if you took econs in secondary school and you like it, then you should also take it in JC lah. Yeah. Okay. How much time? Okay, I think we covered this also. So how much time should we spend studying? The quick answer is not much time. So the studying part is most of the time a given, meaning that you should know your stuff lah. You should know your content. It's just about how you're going to apply it to the exam, and then to answer the specific questions. Okay, then for BCME, is it advisable to pair bio with econs or geog? Okay, again about whether it's advisable, I think you might be referring to whether they are compatible. So to answer that question is actually quite distinct in the sense that, like for myself, I took BCME, and then my class is an econs class lah, so everyone took econs. But I think it's okay to take BCME and geog as well, because really the sciences, right, they don't really, the like bio per se, it doesn't really relate itself to econs. There's no relation at all. Or I think between bio and geog, maybe there's a bit more relation. But bio and econs, there's zero relation. So I'll say it's just about your preference. For humanities wise, yeah, you don't have to pair it to any sciences. It just go according to your preference. Right? So hope that answers the question. Okay, what are the answering techniques? Somewhat similar to O-level history. Okay, I'll say it's a bit different. So answering techniques in econs is a lot about keywords. Okay, and it's also a lot about the framework that you use. So in econs, you'll learn several different frameworks for micro and micro questions. You need to know, very importantly, which framework to apply. So let's say if you apply the wrong framework, right, you could score very little lah. And this is where the difficult part comes in, which is why you need to be familiar with your content, and you need to know when you want to apply A and when you want to apply B. Okay, so this is different from O-level history. So if I recall correctly, O-level history has different questions, like inference questions, purpose questions, and all that. So O-level history is generally, at least answering the question, is easier to see what type of a question is it, and then to use the specific framework or the specific structure that you are employed. But for econs, it's a lot different in that sense lah. So you need to be more versatile, and you need to recognize what the question is testing you on. Yeah, so I'll say that is the main difference between the two. Okay, then what are business related jobs? What are econs related jobs? Okay, so this one is a very general question. I'll say I'm not expert on this, so feel free to just research on uni courses and then the career prospects. But I'll say something related to finance or business probably, because business and finance and marketing, all these are all very interrelated lah. So some people offer majors in multiple domains as well. So I think, long story short, econs is just very versatile. Yeah, I think for more specific ideas, right, I think best would be to research online. Okay, and you can also check with your friends or your seniors lah about their thoughts on this. Okay, where can you get resources? This one is primarily from seniors. Okay, I think you might possibly, if you ask in the Inkie learning chat, I think some of our tutors might have resources to sort of get you started lah, or even your fellow seniors, like, because our Inkie learning chat also at JC people lah, so you can also join our econs our econ chat and then see like what kind of questions are being gone through there lor. Yeah, I think that's the best lah. But definitely, I mean now it's a bit early to get practice questions. I'll say important thing for resources right is to get the notes or like stuff that you can maybe last read through first lah. Okay, so practice questions mainly is most people start to rush or like start being concerned with that later on in JC lah, end of JC one and so on. Okay, my RP was actually 87.5, so I got three A's and two B's. Yeah, so my course was an A lah, so that was my RP. Yeah. Okay, and finally the last one. Is there a lot to catch up on if you didn't take econs? Is POA. Okay, POA, principles of accounting concepts related. Okay, so again, caveat is that I didn't take POA, so I'm not really sure. But I'll say that no, like I was saying earlier, everyone starts off on a really fresh playing field. So there is no such thing as like someone has an advantage. Maybe if you took econs in secondary school, you might have an advantage, but I'll say not for long because I mean JC peeps, I think generally learn and take up new stuff quite fast lah. So after all, at the end of the day, everyone is mainly on the same track. Okay, so if you're on the other hand, IP student or O-level student who didn't take econs, that is not a concern at all because econs is really open to everyone. Okay, so no worries on that front. Yeah, okay, so I think that brings us to the end of the Q&A segment. Okay, hope that I answered everyone's questions. Yeah, we have a few minutes left. Okay, if and does anyone have any questions that you want to ask also, you can feel free to just unmute yourselves and yeah, we can just spend the last few minutes there.